Bellaire, Ohio. A quiet town nestled between coal dust and church bells. The kind of place where secrets echo louder than gossip, and everyone seems to know everyone, at least on the surface. Brad McGarry was one of those people you couldn't ignore, even if you tried. He had a bold laugh, a sharp sense of humor, and a personality that took up space in every room he entered. He was proudly gay in a town where that still raised eyebrows, and he didn't care who was uncomfortable. To some, he was a breath of fresh air. To others, a reminder of everything they tried to pretend didn't exist. But Brad wasn't trying to be anyone's hero. He just wanted to live his truth, love who he loved, and keep his world in order. His home was a reflection of who he was. Neat, warm, and carefully maintained. It sat quietly at the end of a modest street, with a garden he tended and a dog that barked at the slightest sound. On weekends, Brad would host friends for dinner, light up the grill, and fill his house with music, laughter, and stories. But on Sunday, May 7th, 2017, the music stopped. That evening, Brad was expecting company. His close friend Kelly and her daughter were supposed to come over for dinner. Just a few hours earlier, Brad had messaged her about the food, casually asking if they'd remembered to bring ketchup. Then nothing. No replies. No calls returned. Kelly found it strange. So, she drove to his house, expecting maybe his phone had died or he'd fallen asleep. When she arrived, Brad's Jeep was parked in the driveway, and his dog was barking frantically inside the house. But the door stayed shut. The windows were still. Something wasn't right. She knocked, called out his name, tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the lights were off, the TV silent. Everything looked untouched. Then her daughter noticed the basement door was slightly ajar. A small detail, but unsettling. Kelly called out again. No answer. As they slowly stepped down the stairs, the air felt heavier. Then her daughter saw him. Brad was lying face down on the cold basement floor. Blood pooled beneath his head. He wasn't moving. Panic set in. Kelly called 911, barely able to get the words out. The paramedics arrived quickly, followed by the police. But it didn't take long to confirm what she already feared. Brad McGarry was gone, shot twice in the back of the head. At first glance, it didn't make sense. Nothing had been taken. There were no signs of forced entry, no ransacked rooms, no struggle. His phone was resting on the couch. His wallet was still on the kitchen counter. Whoever did this wasn't looking to rob him. They wanted him dead. As investigators began their work, one thing became clear: this was personal. Execution style. Quiet. Clean. Intentional. Police combed through his messages, looking for anything that could point them toward a motive. And that's when they found it. Hidden beneath harmless texts and routine calls, buried in apps and deleted threads, was the shadow of a relationship. Not just any relationship, one that Brad had kept secret. Or more accurately, one that someone else desperately needed to keep hidden. It was with a man who was married, a man who had everything to lose if the truth came out. And Brad? He might have been ready to talk, but someone made sure he never got the chance. The whispers began almost immediately. In a town like Bellaire, nothing stays quiet for long. The news spread fast. Brad McGarry had been murdered. But underneath the shock, some people started asking questions they didn't dare voice out loud. Questions about who Brad had really been seeing. Questions about secrets that might have pushed someone over the edge. The police didn't have much to go on at first. No weapon, no fingerprints, no forced entry. But they did have one powerful lead: Brad's phone. His texts told a story he hadn't shared with many. A complicated, deeply hidden story involving a man named David Kinney. David was Brad's longtime friend. To the public, they were just close. But behind closed doors, it had been more than that. They'd been having a secret affair for years. Brad was open about his sexuality. David was not. He was married to a woman with children and a picture-perfect life he had no intention of destroying. Investigators brought David in for questioning. His reaction was oddly composed. He said he was devastated by Brad's death, claimed they were best friends, that they had spoken just a few days before the murder. But something didn't sit right. He told police he hadn't seen Brad that weekend, that he'd been home with his wife the whole time, helping her clean the garage and watching TV. But then came the inconsistencies. His timeline was vague. He kept pausing before answering. The little details, the ones that matter most, were shaky. And then came the slip-up. In the middle of questioning, without being prompted, David suddenly asked if Brad had been shot. The detectives hadn't told him that. That detail hadn't been released to the public. And yet, he knew. They leaned in, asked him to explain how he knew that. David stumbled, then said someone had told him. But when asked who that someone was, he couldn't remember. It didn't add up. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. They needed something concrete. So they dug deeper. They pulled phone records, checked GPS data. And that's when everything started to unravel. David's phone had pinged near Brad's house the evening of the murder. Not once, but multiple times. He had been there despite saying otherwise. And not just for a few minutes, long enough to contradict every part of his alibi. They confronted him again. This time he broke. He admitted to being at Brad's house that day, but insisted it was only to talk. He said Brad had become clingy, that he was threatening to expose their relationship, that he feared it would destroy his marriage, his family, his entire life. And then he said Brad had a gun, that they struggled, that the gun went off twice. But detectives weren't buying it. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, no bruising. Brad had been shot cleanly in the back of the head. Execution style. This wasn't a panic reaction. It was cold. It was planned. They asked David where the gun was now. He claimed he threw it in the river, panicked after realizing what he'd done. But no weapon was ever recovered. The final nail came from a single shell casing found in the basement, and a set of work boots, David's boots, with traces of Brad's blood on them. He was arrested, charged with murder, and taken into custody. Word of his arrest hit Belair like a bomb. A married man, a father, accused of killing his secret lover to keep his life intact. People didn't know what shocked them more, the murder or the motive. In court, David pleaded not guilty. He said it had all been a tragic accident, that he never meant to pull the trigger, that it all happened too fast. But the evidence told another story, and the jury believed it. The courtroom was silent as the jury returned with their verdict. It had taken them less than 4 hours to deliberate. Every eye in the room was fixed on David Kinney, the man who just weeks ago was known as a husband, a father, a coal miner, and now a murderer. Guilty. The word echoed like a thunderclap. No outbursts, just silence, and the weight of a truth too heavy for many to process. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called the crime cold-blooded and cowardly. There were no apologies from David, no tears, no final words of regret, only the tight-lipped silence of a man whose lies had finally caught up with him. For Brad's loved ones, the sentence was a small comfort. His cousin, who had found the body, never quite recovered from that moment. The trauma of walking into that basement still haunted her. Friends said Brad had a vibrant energy, someone who laughed easily, who loved fiercely, who never hid who he was, even when it cost him. The community of Belair struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the dark truth that unfolded. Small towns aren't made for stories like this, stories full of hidden identities, forbidden love, and betrayal so deep it ends in blood. Some blamed David's upbringing. Others said the weight of living a double life had finally broken him. But for many, those explanations rang hollow. At the end of the day, Brad was gone, and the man who had claimed to love him had pulled the trigger. In the aftermath, Brad's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how secrets, shame, and fear can twist into something lethal. His friends chose to honor him not with sorrow, but with visibility. They organized candlelight vigils. They raised awareness about LGBTQ+ safety in small communities. They made sure his name wouldn't fade into just another headline. Brad McGarry was more than the victim of a crime. He was a person who dared to live honestly in a world that wasn't always kind to that honesty. And though his life ended in tragedy, the truth of who he was and how he lived still echoes louder than the way he died. Because sometimes evil doesn't look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a friend, someone trusted, someone you'd never suspect until it's too late. If this story left you with chills, questions, or just that uneasy feeling deep in your chest, you're not alone. At Trace of Evil, we shine a light into the darkest corners of human nature, where secrets live and sometimes where murder hides. If you want more stories like this, true, haunting, and unforgettable, make sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us every week as we uncover the truths some wish stayed buried. Because the most terrifying monsters are often the ones we know. This is Trace of Evil, and some shadows never fade.